Welcome to Health Systems CIO's interview with Kathy Hughes, Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer with Northwell Health. I'm Anthony Guerra, Founder and Editor-in-Chief. Kathy, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Anthony.
Oh, great. Looking forward to having a nice chat. I love to start these out. It's an interesting role. You're not just in healthcare. You're not just in IT. You're in healthcare IT security. So I like to find out how people wound up where they are. So take me back and tell me how you wound up in this little niche of the world.
Okay, well, I think like most of my peers and other people I know that you've interviewed, we tend to start out on the infrastructure side of the house and into the operations and the engineering, even the architecture side, which is where I started many years ago. And I've always had an interest in security. It was part of what we did as on the infrastructure team, and typically people associate things like patching and malware protection with security, but it became much bigger as time progressed. And a lot of organizations like Northwell felt the need to break it out separately and to really focus time, effort, and people on really building out a program to ensure the appropriate defenses were in place. So when I joined Northwell, initially I was on the outsourcing side of the house and in charge of all the traditional infrastructure teams. And then an opportunity became available at North Shore LIJ, which is now Northwell, to really lead up and head the disaster recovery program. So I really started focusing on that about eight or 9 years ago. Built out that program to where it is today, and it's still going through a number of changes as things evolve and such. But during that time, I was asked to temporarily take on the security function because the director in charge of the group had decided to leave. So I took over the team on an interim basis and, quickly learned just how much needed to be done in that area. And when they did eventually hire the director to take over, I specifically requested that I hold on to the risk management group because I really found that interesting and knew that a lot needed to be done specifically in that area. So I held on to that and really matured that program as well. Really built out our HIPAA, compliance and security program along with my peers in corporate compliance, built out the PCI security program and other programs as well. And that was a real, significant accomplishment. And I, from there, the role of the CISO had become more well known, and a lot of organizations were starting to add CISOs within their organization. So I ultimately applied for the position, and as they say, the rest is history. But really what sparked my real interest in the area was the fact that I was actually the victim of identity theft. And, having lived through that firsthand and just realizing how vulnerable you feel when you're violated in such a way where your identity has been compromised, it really made me want to focus that much more in this particular area. So I feel very fortunate that I've been able to not only take my experience in the infrastructure role that I had for many years and being able to build upon that, but also taken my personal experience that I had having been the victim of identity theft and learning firsthand what people had to go through. I was able to leverage that and build out the program that we have in place today.
So is that identity theft is as much of a nightmare as people say it is?
It really is. And the identity theft that I had experienced, years ago before it was really a popular term,
Right.
it was really learning from the ground up what it felt like and what the obstacles were and all the different things you had to go through with reporting to local police and law enforcement. And then, because I had been erroneously charged for things I didn't buy, dealing with the credit card companies and the firm that claimed I'd made these expenses and trying to get that removed from my credit rating was something that was really a very painful and very long process to go through. And then just learning from them, things that you had to put in place, such as making sure you have credit freezes in place so that somebody can't compromise or can impersonate you to make purchases like that, or to use your identity for other fraudulent type purposes, like, I'm just using this as an example, but healthcare services or filing tax returns or things like that, which is what identities are typically used for. They're not only used for credit card fraud, but for other purposes as well. So it's really important. And that's one message I always try to get out there, is that, to encourage people to put credit freezes using the big companies, Equifax, TransUnion. And then if you do need a line of credit, then to go through the process to have that freeze lifted temporarily while you need to get whatever transaction you need to get done completed.
Yeah, sometimes you see these breaches and you see a couple million records were released, and you wonder if people feel like, well, I'm one of a few million.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to look at my records. Nothing's going to happen. But you're more sensitive to that because it
Yes.
happened to you. So I'm assuming you would be much more proactive in trying to make sure, if there ever was a breach, that the records that were exposed, that those people did everything possible to make sure
Yes.
nothing resulted from that.
Absolutely. Feel very strongly about that. And I'm very concerned about that. And that's why, and I've shared this story with not only other people, but my team as well. And because it's really important to have them understand the meaning behind what they're doing, and that it is important, and how disruptive identity theft or any kind of misuse of someone's personal identity, just how impacting it can be. I mean, luckily, I was able to catch the identity theft pretty early on. And so that, it wasn't, I've heard horror stories about things that have happened to people where they've lost their life savings and things like that. So because people don't know what they need to check and just monitor and make sure that, there aren't any fraudulent charges or misuse of their user ID and passwords, and that they, I try to encourage people to practice those things. But it's important, I think, to kind of provide that insight to people and let them know what it's really like to have been a victim. So I think that's been very empowering to me, and very important to the people that I've shared the story with.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate to say, I guess it's an upside of what happened to you, right? At least you're
Yeah.
doing something constructive with it. I want to go back to disaster recovery. You mentioned that was part of your background before
Yes.
you even, when you were still doing infrastructure and things like that. And I think a lot about how closely tied security has to be to disaster recovery, because we've seen organizations have to go to paper and then
Yeah.
have to go back. And as I think through what that's like, that has got to be so incredibly complex in terms of the interactions between IT security, IT, and the operational leaders, the clinical folks. Um, you are dealing with the outage, you are dealing with the breach and possibly a ransomware situation, whatever the case may be. Um, you may have to take systems offline. You have to understand the operational impacts of what you're saying may have to be done. So I've also been thinking about how much CISOs have to know about the clinical operations so that they can be well informed when they're talking about risk, when they're talking about different things, and system may have to come down. Well, do you understand what that system does and the impact of that system coming down? And have you coordinated with the physicians? Have you game planned that out? Anyway, talk to me a little bit about what proper disaster recovery and business continuity planning requires in
Mhm.
terms of IT working with actual clinical operational leaders.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's so incredibly important. And I think traditional disaster recovery in my roots really came from planning for the very unlikely scenario that there would be a flood or fire at a data center, and you'd
Mhm.
have to recover systems offline. And typically organizations did that through making sure they had offsite backups, or they could build up servers at a colo, or a location that maybe they had on contract. And today we all know that it's much more than that, because the likelihood of a flood or fire, although still real, especially in certain areas, is less likely than being attacked by a cyber incident,
Mhm.
as you've alluded to. And the need to recover systems quickly is very, very important. So at Northwell, what we've actually done is we actually, in a separate group from me, but I'm very closely aligned and even have a dotted line reporting structure to the senior vice president in charge of our business continuity and crisis management group. And we have a separate division just focused on that to deal with all the things you just mentioned. It's really understanding what are your most essential services that you have, and what would you do if they were impacted? And most, I'll call them business continuity or downtime procedures, are really focused on short time incidents, being down a couple hours because a piece of hardware broke, or being down because there's some type of an upgrade that's being done. And I've had to work very closely with the senior vice president of this group to really make them understand that you could be down for days, weeks, or even months. And we really need to be prepared to deal with that. And so this has been really, something that is fairly, it's new to us as far as the longer term planning. We have, very good, solid short-term plans in place, but we're starting to really build out that program a little bit more. And, we've engaged a third-party consulting firm to kind of assist and guide us with this. And it's important to not only understand these essential services, as I mentioned, but everything, all these systems and data are connected to everything else. So you really have to understand we call your upstream systems and data feeds into your primary essential services, as well as what those downstream data, integrations need to be, and how that impacts your downstream applications, because everything in healthcare is connected. Having the full view of a patient's clinical information is critical, and that involves all these systems and the information from them being available. So I think this is an area of focus for Northwell, as well as for other organizations. And in parallel to that, we are, transforming the way we do traditional disaster recovery. So we're looking at, technology platforms like continuous data protection, where we're always replicating data to an offsite cloud area, or to an off-network type backup solution, so that should we be hit by a cyber incident, we have the ability to recover in the most timely and efficient manner possible. So those are just some of the initiatives that we're currently working on, and that tremendous progress we've made in those areas. But of course, there's more to do.
Yeah, and it's like an insurance type situation. I mean, you could spend all kinds of money so that you can recover within a millisecond, but that would cost, ridiculous amount of money. So what's appropriate, right? What's the expectation for recovery? When do we want to recover? And then you might do your research and say, okay, here's what it's going to cost. What do you think? And they say, well, it's too much. Okay, let's say it takes a little long to recover. Can we bring the price down? So where do you start? Do you start with the expectations of the business for when it expects to be up? Or do you start with, here is what it will cost to get us this level of service? I mean, there's different ways to go about it, right?
Yeah, so it's really a mix of the two, because I think that, nowadays we all expect, and this is no different in healthcare, everybody expects everything to be available all the time. But in the reality is that comes with a price tag.
Right.
So what we've done is we've established what we call disaster recovery tiers, where we've gone through a process to really look at all the applications in our environment, to really understand which are those that are really essential and most critical, mission critical to the organization, and to make sure that we've really invested appropriately in those, so that should we need to rely on that, on bringing those systems, if we need to bring those systems up within a short period of time, because the expectation is, and then high 90% availability, that we have the ability to do so. So we've gone through this disaster recovery classification process, and the typical spread that organizations have is that most of your tier 1 applications, that should be the far and few between, 5% of the environment. Most applications that you have, about 80% might fall into a tier 2, and then a tier 3 might be things that are, important, but not so critical, maybe a 10%, and then your remaining 5% would be, hey, if the system goes away and never comes back, or we don't get it up for weeks or months, we'll be okay. We have other ways to support the operation and continue to work. So it's really going through, and because everybody's going to tell you, if you ask someone how important is your system, they're going to say mine is the most important system.
That's what I was just thinking. I was going to ask you, how do those tiers get defined? Because if
Yes.
you're just waiting for that list to be delivered to you, everything would be in tier one.
Yeah, so we came up with very clear definitions, and tier one is a mission critical system. These are the systems that must be available, because if they're not, someone might die or we might lose a lot of money. I'm just, kind of
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but without them, where our organization may not be viable if we're down for a significant amount of time. So it's really, to your point, it's engaging not only the IT folks, but it's engaging the clinical people, because I certainly don't know what systems they rely on most
Right.
heavily. And things change over time too, because
Right.
a system that might have been deemed mission critical at one point isn't so important now, because a new system they brought in has comparable functionality and it's built in. So there's a constant review cycle that needs to take place to make sure that your applications are tiered appropriately, and that you really have identified with, through really a committee type approach to
Yeah.
what those most essential services are, so that you can ensure that that you can make them as available as possible.
I've read things here and there about IT department's going to go away. Somebody wrote a thought piece about that, and it's just got to be part of the organization. Um, and it makes me think that in order to be a successful healthcare IT executive today, you cannot be in any kind of isolation, because you need to be so involved with the operations and
Everything.
understand so much about what's going on and coordinate and communicate. That old model of IT being in a little bubble in a separate building, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's all about, I would add to that, is collaboration is key. And, one of my main role, I would say, is making sure, although I report to the CIO, I have dotted line reports to corporate compliance and internal audit and corporate security, which handles physical security, and our corporate risk management team and our Office of Legal Affairs. I work collaboratively with them on everything that we do.
Hmm.
I'm involved in several committees, a couple of which I lead, where we have an IT risk governance committee, and involves representatives from all those different areas that I just mentioned, and also a research organization too. And so it's something that we continually talk about. It's my job to, make them aware of what's going on in the world and what the current threats are and what we're doing to protect ourselves. But ultimately, what we do and how we protect our systems isn't an IT issue, it's an enterprise
Hmm.
issue. And it's a risk management process that we need to go through to make sure that we're setting our priorities appropriately and that they align with the overall strategies and vision of our organization, to make sure we're investing appropriately. And it's investing in not only process and technology, but people. And I think that's a really important variable, because one of the concepts that I'm always trying to get across to everybody is that everybody in our organization is a member of the security team. It's just not me and my few departments that I have. Everybody has a role and responsibility. And one of the most effective ways that we've combated phishing,
Hmm.
as an example, phishing attacks, is that we have empowered our users with a button to report suspicious emails, or a separate email address if they think something's suspicious. And because of their vigilance and because of the awareness that we've created, we have thwarted many attacks from being successful, because they got through our technology filters. But at the end of the day, it was up to the person behind the keyboard making a conscious decision, or just looking at it, the email, and saying, hey, this doesn't look quite right, I'm going to report it. And many times it's just spam emails, marketing emails that come out. But on occasion, there have been some that have gotten through our filters. And because the people took the time to report the emails being suspicious, we were able to put the appropriate controls in place to block access to a malicious site, or to remove unopened emails from other people's mailboxes that might have also received it.
Right. So still the biggest threat is coming in through email, and
Mhm.
it's social engineering,
Yep.
and they can be more sophisticated. They can be pretty sophisticated. They're doing research. They're targeting particular individuals. They know who they are. They know where they work. They know the department. They've studied them on social media, and they're able to reference things that they've put on social media, or they allude to things going on at the organization, new construction or whatnot. Sometimes they're people dealing with accounts and paying vendors, pretending to be some vendor, things like. So these are the way that things are getting in. You're doing everything you can from a technology point of view, sort of
Mhm.
as a strainer, to get rid of a lot of it. And what comes through, you hope employee education covers the
Yes.
rest, correct?
Yes, yes. And we conduct, as many organizations do, phishing exercises,
Hmm.
that to really test people's understanding of, of how to detect and report suspicious emails. And we do we call them campaigns or exercises, but we also do targeted exercises, which is really critical. So for example, every few months we target our finance department who has wire transfer capabilities,
Yeah.
because to your exact point, they are very highly targeted individuals. Their names are commonly known, either through LinkedIn or through some posting that they might have on social media. A threat actor might be able to determine that they have certain capabilities. So
Hmm.
they will specifically target those users. So we will conduct phishing exercises. First, we always provide some training and reminders and things like that, what to look out for, but then we'll actually test them. And we've gotten to a point where we work very closely with our HR department, our human resources department, and legal, and also with our compliance department to create a disciplinary matrix for people who, in these exercises, uh, repeatedly we call fail or become or fall victim to them, to reinforce how to recognize and report suspicious emails. And it's a progressive matrix where, we'll provide training, on the spot training. If they click on a link, they get a page that's flashed up. And if we see repeated behavior, we'll have them make them watch a video specifically on phishing. And if it happens a third time, we might require them to do a real live online, used to be classroom type training, but we don't do that now, and do something, to really reinforce the concepts and really work with the individuals, because that's really the important thing. We want to work with these individuals to really make them understand how important it is and what happens if it just takes one person to click on a link in order for systems to become unavailable. And disciplinary action can lead up to and including termination. That's how seriously that we take this.
Yeah, I read that you had said that, and I was impressed because I ask a lot of CISOs about this kind of thing, and not many people like to talk about sort of getting tough.
Yeah,
Everybody wants
you
to
have
talk
to.
about in healthcare, we got to get along, tell them to do better.
Yeah.
But at some point, I say, if somebody's repeatedly doing this, first of all, you might want to study them in and of themselves and try and
Right.
figure out what is this profile that this person keeps doing that. Um, can you work this into the hiring process? Can you? Should this be part of an interview? Something someone's asked to get a sense of whether or not they have any concept of this and are sensitive. Do they get it, or they blow it off and you go, "We're not sure we want this person in our organization."
Well, what we do is during the hiring process itself, we really don't have the opportunity to do that other than some kind of, criminal background check on an
Hmm.
individual. Um, but what we do though is we have as part of our onboarding process, I have my manager of our security awareness and training program give a talk. She actually we have a live every Monday morning. There's a new hire training, and she is on the agenda to speak to this group to explain the importance of phishing, how to recognize and report phishing emails. And she also tells them, and by the way, hint, hint, within the next few weeks,
Hmm.
we're going to test your knowledge of this. And that's really important because, to your point, our new employees are the most susceptible. And we found when we ran our enterprise campaigns and tried to figure out, what type of targeted exercises do we need to run, we found there was a very common theme between new hires. New hires just didn't seem to get it because they hadn't been barraged with our constant, screensavers and email blasts and newsletters and digital signage and poster and social media posts and all those things that we use mobile, using mobile device, mobile communications. If it's out there, we have partnered also with our corporate communication groups and asked them, what are the different ways that we can reach out to people? Because there's different methods applied to different individuals. We have a whole host, some people will only look at email and other people will never look at email. They only look at social media posts. So we've really leveraged all those different communication methods to try to get through to our staff. So new hires that come on board, haven't necessarily been exposed to that. So that's one of the ways that we really reinforce that concept. And if they fail the first time around, we will refish them to make sure that they get it and work with them one-on-one as needed, because it's much easier to deal with the smaller group and give them that personalized attention than just throwing, a phishing net out and trying to just get one message across to everyone. It's more effective to target users that are most targeted, because of their role in the organization, or those that are most vulnerable because of their stature, specifically new hires.
Yeah. Do you try and keep them fair, those phishing emails? I guess
Well,
you don't put anything in there about you got a bonus, because I heard people get upset with that.
No. But what we do though is we do have a recognition program, because just like we have a disciplinary program, we also have a recognition program. I think it's just as important to acknowledge people who say it through in the course of a year. We do four to six enterprise campaigns. If there are people that always report that the email was suspicious, then we will recognize them with either a cyber champion, like a badge of some type, or even with some what we call My Rewards points. We have like a system where you can earn points by doing certain things, and we will reward points. And I remember I always wondered, is this really an effective strategy? And I remember a couple of years ago, when we were able to walk around office buildings, I was walking around. It was right after we had just notified people that, hey, great job, we're giving you these reward points, they're going to be available this day. And I was walking by, and no one knew people didn't know who I was. And they were saying they were so happy. The couple people had just received this email. They were so happy and thrilled and patting themselves on the back about, wow, I got these reward points and this great. And the word just got out, word of mouth just got out about it. And they were being our advocates for telling their coworkers, really should report these things. You can get these points and you get this nice badge and you get this nice email. So it really has been a very effective strategy to not only recognize good behavior, but also to call out those, individuals through disciplinary actions that need to have behaviors reinforced.
Right. Anything come to mind if I ask you, what is something you're looking at, either a technology, a service, an issue going on, that you say maybe not all my CISO colleagues are quite up on this, or maybe I've done research, I got a way to move forward, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty around this. Anything come to mind that you would want to just tell your fellow CISOs that something to think about? Here's something to think about that I've been looking at.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of buzzwords out there. So, and I think that was even a lot, with this recent Log4j vulnerability that was discovered back in December, all kinds of marketing information from different vendors about we've got the silver bullet to solve your problems. And we all know that if there's really nothing out there, it's really making sure that you have that you're able to kind of press that button when you need to get all hands on deck to address an issue when it's as large as this Log4j vulnerability that was discovered. And so I would just advise them to make sure that you have the ability to do that, to make sure that you can press that button to assemble people together, to explain to them what's going on and what you need from them. We have, well over 1,000 applications within the environment. And this Log4j vulnerability, you just didn't know when it first was announced whether or not your applications were even susceptible to this vulnerability. So we really needed to engage all our application teams and say, hey, we have a call to action. We need you to reach out to your vendors and find out is the application susceptible? And let's take a risk-based approach to this. Let's focus on those systems that provide the most essential services to our company, to our organization, and make sure that they're aware of this, number one, and they're doing something about it, number two, if they're susceptible. And meaning that, are they working on a patch, and when do they expect to have it available? So we did that, and we are, we still have work to do, but we've tackled those systems that, are most critical ones. And we did involve people from all our different application teams, and ask them to kind of step up and work with us, collaborate with us to get this vulnerability mitigated. So that's one thing that I think is really sometimes overlooked. I think that, to your point, sometimes security teams or traditional IT teams tend to work in this bubble, and they can't. You need to get everybody involved and engaged when things like this are announced.
You mentioned an all hands on deck button. Are you talking about something more specific or concrete, or are you talking about relationship building to
Yeah,
where
really about
they know
relation.
who you are? You've spoken to them before, you had a little chat, so now you're not just, oh my God, the VP CISO, it's Kathy calling me. Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, so what we have, a service management team, and part of our service management team is a situation management group. So if there's a hurricane coming, if there's some kind of major upgrade being done on a system, if there's some type of major outage because a system isn't working for whatever reason, our situation management team, which we have already in place, gets involved in providing communications out to the getting information from people, and then communicating out information. So we leverage that team, our situation management team. I reached out to the head of that department. I said, we have a situation, and we need to get ourselves
Yeah.
organized around this. And we need to get representation from all the different application teams, and the application teams, as well as our infrastructure teams, because infrastructure teams own applications. And as well as, our key contacts in departments outside of IT that actually manage systems, like, for example, a clinical engineering team. We need to get all these folks on a call, explain to them what's going on, and we need to have some kind of, weekly cadence to review status and to report out to senior leadership what's going on and what's being done. So that's what we just leverage that team that's already in, that we already have set up, really not meant to deal with this specifically, but it's the same concept that there's a hurricane coming and we need to make plans. We get this group together, and so we just leverage that same group for this purpose.
So make sure you have a situation management
Yeah.
team, and
Yes.
that's your all hands on deck button that calls them.
Yes.
I like it. Very good. All right, Kathy, that's about all we had time for today. Fantastic conversation, lots of good stuff in there, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Take care.